Oh, how's everybody doing? Well, it's just wonderful, wonderful. I'm so excited to be able to bring to you more information about Pluto. You have to understand Pluto has been a planet in astrology of great controversy, but also in the field of planetary science. That little guy has been of controversy as well. And it wasn't until one of our most beloved scientists, planetary scientists, demoted Pluto from a planet to a dwarf planet. Not only did this cause an uproar in certain sectors of the scientific community, particularly the planetary science, but it also, unbeknownst and in total surprise to the scientific community, the layman, the average person that either knows something, knows a lot, or knows nothing about Pluto. It really struck a nerve in the collective psyche that the planet Pluto was reduced to a dwarf planet. Even though the planet Pluto does meet the scientific and morphological requirements of being called a planet. It does. But an action was taken to reduce it to a dwarf planet. It caused such an uproar in popular culture that it was reinstated as a planet. They better, because Pluto is most definitely a planet, and he is vitally important in humanity's mythology. Although the discovery of Pluto occurred in 1930 at 4 degrees Cancer, a very important midpoint for the birth chart of the United States, which is Cancer. A lot happened in 1929 with the country's finances. And Cancer is one of the most industrious, money-making signs in the zodiac. And Cancer, in the Sibley chart of the United States, but also the non-Sibley chart of the United States, puts Cancer in the second house of money and income. And definitely this country went through a devastating financial loss, almost plunging it into poverty. But because of the nature of Pluto and Scorpio and the 8th house, and the energies are not watered down, they're equally powerful, whether it's the 8th house, Pluto, or the sign Scorpio. There was a transformation, and the United States was moved out of poverty after it went through its most devastating polarity shadow of Capricorn, the devil, losing everything in resources. So many people committed suicide in 1929 when the stock market crashed, plunging the country, the United States, into poverty. It was the first time ever in American history that we've experienced poverty, where people were lining streets long around corners for soup kitchens so to get food for the day. It was a very dark time for us, but we experienced the darkest bottom of the barrel polarity of Pluto in Cancer. And then we reached the highest in economic superpower, unlike any other country on the planet. And we still hold this position today. So understand the extreme that Pluto can bring you as a collective. Can you imagine that same energy and intensity and potential might as an individual person? This is something that was not clearly studied, although we had astrologers like Jeffrey Green, Joan E. McEvers and McGregor Mathers, John Noel Tile, but even they, and Liz Green, Susan Taylor, not Susan Taylor, but I was, what's her name? These are astrologers that, what's the other one? There's so many good ones. Yes? 1 second, please. No, I'm good. Yeah, I just kind of like myself. You know, I'm doing the video while I'm at the hotel. And you know me, sat in the third house and striking any interruptions and stuff like that. You know, you have to make it a way of life. You have to accept it. Nothing to do. So, Pluto has been very much a subject of controversy. Many astrologers that I grew up learning from always attributed Pluto as a generational planet, and that it should not be interpreted personally in individual birth charts. So not much was written about Pluto as how he worked in birth charts. I've always felt that this was a bad idea, that this was a real grave mistake. I believe that many modern astrologers of the day, when I was studying astrology, just didn't have any information about Pluto. Pluto was discovered in Cancer in 1929. We didn't have any astrologers alive then, and even if we did, the discovery of Pluto lent no room to understand how it works in individual birth charts. It was too new. No one knew. Time had to elapse in decades for us, and then go back in history and look at how Pluto actually affected a generation, affected a culture, a race, or even, but it was never brought to the point of how it affects an individual. No astrologer other than Jeffrey Green wrote about how Pluto, from volume 1, volume 2, Pluto, the evolutionary journey of the soul. But even talking about the soul was a new thing in the 80s and in the 90s. And even though it was a great forward movement in thinking, there was no empirical data to suggest how Pluto specifically worked in individual birth charts. Again, studies and interviews had to be done, not just within the United States, but in other races and cultures and countries, to see if there's a correlation, if it works the same way, if there are certain principles that we can extrapolate and actually decode and say, well, based on these amounts of years that has elapsed, looking at these particular charts, we can say that it works this way or it works that way, you know. And these are longitudinal studies that can take decades of empirical research. You know, we just cannot, again, and I have said this before in other videos, that to interpret Pluto in the birth chart, you have to look at it from a mythological point of view, which has its own sets of rules and standards, and also empirical, which means away from the mythology and just how the planet itself functions in the birth chart of individuals by observing behavior, trial and error, and taking written statements and testimonies of people that may have gone through major life crises that mimics the principles of Pluto, away from the mythology, which bears a whole different frame of reference. So these astrologers attempted with great courage to write about Pluto individually as far as it works in the birth chart, are now dead. We, meaning myself and people of my generation, astrologers of my generation, are now the ruling class and at the forefront of astrology. If there's going to be any books written on the subject, it will come from my generation, because the ones that we learned from are now dead. So we're taking the torch and we write the books and we give the different studies and findings that might be quite different than how we learned from our predecessors. So I will be doing a series on Pluto, both sign and house. But understand that because many of you are millennials, many of you were not born in particular periods, we will not be discussing, for example, Pluto in Leo. We won't be discussing, which is the 1940s, 50s. We're not going to be discussing Pluto in Virgo, which was the late 50s to the 1960s. I was born with Pluto in Virgo in the late 1960s. We will, though, discuss Pluto in Libra, which defines the 70s. But even people born in the 70s are much, much older than the millennials. For this to really be of significance, we have to begin with Pluto in Sagittarius and skip Pluto in Scorpio, which is still being researched. It's quite complex here. It's also quite complex in Virgo too. Right. So we are going to talk about Pluto in Sagittarius, Pluto in Capricorn. We have a Pluto return. The last time Pluto was in Capricorn was in the 1500s. We are having a Pluto return in the United States, again based on the Sigma chart of the United States. And that's still a subject of great controversy. We've never had Pluto in Capricorn before. No one was alive in the 1500s. There's no reference to it. We have to observe human behavior and observation and testimonies of people and astrologers like myself that are dedicated to research to find out how Pluto works in Capricorn, how it works in Sagittarius, and then see it cross-sectionally to races and cultures, how it correlates to a common thread. Now then we can define, this is Pluto in Capricorn, Pluto in Scorpio, Pluto in Sagittarius, and be correct across the board. But that takes years of observational research and doing interviews and looking at fantastic charts that actually bring out the best and the worst qualities of Pluto. Mimosa. I've been studying Pluto for a long time. I have the little guy conjunct the sun in Virgo. I'm a Plutonian. I have the sun conjunct Pluto. You are also a Plutonian if you have Pluto conjunct the moon in your chart. You are also a Plutonian if you have Pluto on the ascendant. Know that your life will not be easy. People will like you or hate you for no apparent reason. Your life will be a series of crises that you must transform and overcome, and each phase of these intense crises makes a new person out of you. Oh, Pluto is quite a little guy, let me tell you. And the definition of Pluto in the science is 100% different than its definition in the houses. So what have we learned about Pluto personally in birth charts? Using myself and those of my generation that are Virgos that have Pluto in Virgo, and also those who have Pluto in Libra and are born Libras. You know, I've seen similar characteristics of Pluto. I will go through them now. The first observation that we've encountered is that anyone with Pluto conjunct the sun, I don't care if you're Libra, I don't care if you're Virgo or Leo, we're really not going to know beyond. We don't know Pluto in Gemini. We don't know Pluto in Taurus. We don't know Pluto in Aries. We don't know Pluto in Cancer. And such people, we have to look at human history and look at fascinating personalities of those periods to get a clue. But are we going to get written actual testimonies? No, because we weren't alive, and no one was alive to make those research then, and no one wrote books about it because Pluto, we didn't know that Pluto existed in the solar system. We just found out about him in 1929, 1930. So there's very little about Pluto that we know. However, because as astrologers, and I've done thousands of charts. I've been doing this since I was 16 years old and traveled the world twice over and talking to other astrologers of other countries and cultures and other systems like the Vedic systems. Now we get insights as to how Pluto works across the board. And we find that even across cultures far different from ours, we find the same linear fabric of Pluto, even in the most extreme cultures. One example is that if you got Pluto conjunct the sun or the moon or on the ascendant, you are going to exude a very powerful presence, a very powerful aura. And it is intimidating. It is unfriendly. You psychologically might be aware of this, or you might not be aware of it. People like you or they don't like you. People will, for no reason, start trouble and fights with you. They'll try to betray you, cause treason, set you up. Again, not knowing even why. The mere presence of your presence next to these people causes primal fears of instinctual survival. And even these people that go through these feelings when you're around don't even know why. This is one characteristic of Pluto that is very poorly understood. We don't see that kind of fear expressed in Scorpio, the planet's ruling sign. If anything, it's quite contained, but the Scorpio energy in itself is quite contained. So is Pluto. It really depends on the evolutionary station that the person is in. If the person is not evolved and they have this very powerful conjunction or connection or even midpoint to it, it could prove quite destructive, catastrophic. And in Pluto, over time of the development of the individual, provides great discipline. It really is terrible in the first 30 years of life. Actually, the same thing can be said about Saturn. Saturn, before age 30, is probably the worst. Getting much better as we get older. So that's one characteristic of Pluto. The second characteristic is what you wear. People that have Pluto conjunct the Sun or the Moon or on the ascendant like to dress in black. They like to wear black t-shirt, black jacket, black pants, black shoes, black socks. I did, and many of them too. They go through a period of extreme darkness from within that they are proud of and enjoy and test. And they also can become quite Machiavellian. Machiavellian is a term that it's European, but it's someone that can be very sexy and sensual, as you will be with Pluto conjunct the Sun or the Moon or in the ascendant, but connect to the darker side of human sensuality. Not sexuality, which is something that belongs to Mars, but sensuality. Because the polarity of Scorpio is Taurus, which is the sign of sensuality. And we have to bring that into account when we're talking about Pluto. In Scorpio or aspecting Scorpio, but we cannot really say much when it comes to Taurus. Pluto, in the last time Pluto was in Taurus, we're going back to almost 936 BC. Okay, I want you to understand how far back in time we're going. Pluto has an orbit of 248 years around the Sun. No one lives that long to give account of how the planet works. Okay, so we are very blessed and lucky that we have Pluto in the signs, and really talking about Pluto in Libra, Scorpio, Sagittarius, and Capricorn. These four signs, we have consciousness about them, and we can write about them based on these signs and how it affects the people and natives of these signs. But we have no idea about Pluto in Aquarius. It hasn't happened yet. That's yet to come. And we have no idea of Pluto in Pisces. That's another 500 years from now, and going around the Sun in 248 years. Without that orbit, we're looking about 60 years. We have to wait. Remember, Pluto is in the signs relatively 30 years. So in order to understand Pluto in Pisces, we need to wait 60 years for people born under that. No one will be alive by then. So do you see and do you understand the gravity? Right? I hope you enjoyed this introduction. If you do like it, let me know. I'll give you donations, and we will begin with an interpretation of Pluto in the houses. That we can do, and we have lots of empirical data that confirms Pluto's position in the houses. Not the signs, but the houses. And we'll begin with Pluto in the first house. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you enjoyed this introduction. Please donate and please give. You know the description back has all the information that will let me know that you are interested in this series.